what what Howard Bloom from last episode would call that inbuilt mechanism for destruction, not only of things, but of other people. Because if that had gone on a couple more days, I mean, who knows where that would have gone with those kids?
I mean, it's, I think, I don't know, almost impossible to know. Yes, it was 20 years ago. But 20 years ago is not, not that long ago. This could have been 30 years ago. If you did that documentary again right now, you would have the exact same outcome, I think. Have things changed that much in the last 20 years? I guess Adderall and things like that are certainly prescribed much more. And so there, some number of those kids would be on medication to help them with whatever their issues are, probably because there's, that has been rampant the last 20 years. But that predilection, or whatever you want to call it, for just mayhem and destruction because, the shackles have been dropped, absolutely would happen every single time.
I agree with that. And I wonder if there's a certain, the physical destruction of the property probably would happen. I wonder if there's a little bit more, because this is something that I observe in my sons and their friends, there's a little bit more compassion for kids who are different, it seems, from these new generations. There's a lot more acceptance of difference from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's across the board, but it's like my kids openly talk about, they'll ask me, so, did you have any Jewish friends growing up? And I have to think about it. I'm like, oh, did I? Probably not until college, because I grew up in a very closed environment.
Right.
Do you have any Muslim friends? Oh, definitely not until graduate school, just because of my upbringing. Right. And it's like, well, did you have any gay friends? Probably didn't know it at the time, because that wasn't discussed until college, right. Or graduate school. So I wonder if there's a little bit more acceptance on an interpersonal level within that system of relations that kind of plays into the pecking order, where you don't have to do things like the feminization of names and things like that as a part of a ritual. That being said, I know it still happens to a certain extent because I've heard it and I've seen it, but
oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all anecdotal. So one of the things that I kind of want to leave us with is this idea that comes from, and I can't do an exact quote here, but this idea from Aristotle. And one of the things I always talk about with Aristotle is this idea of moderation, everything in moderation. Mm-hmm. If you eat too much, you're going to get sick. You don't eat enough, you're going to get sick. Do everything moderately. And another thing that Aristotle said, and again, I don't have an exact quote, but one of the things that I think Aristotle promoted was this idea of being excellent at one thing, but be very good at a lot of little things. Mm-hmm. Right? Have expertise in one area, but a well-rounded person will know a little bit about a lot of stuff.
Sure.
And I think that plays into it because when we have to take different roles within a pecking order, that allows us to have more fluidity and less trauma when we have to shift from being the leader to being the joker, or being the leader to being, okay, this is not my bailiwick. I'm just going to do what I'm told and lift stuff and put stuff down because this is clearly not my area. And along with that, what I'd like to do is I would like to read from a fellow by the name of Kurt Vonnegut. This is from one of his, I won't say lesser known works because I think all of his work should be known, but this is from Bluebeard, which came out in 82 or 83, I think. And Bluebeard is about a painter who has this painting in his barn that he claims he's working on, but no one is sure if he's actually telling the truth. But I used to use this particular piece as a way to get my students talking about the way communication technology changes their sense of what self is and what individuality is. This came out in 87, actually. So here we go. And this guy narrating is the painter. And he says, I was obviously born to draw better than most people. Other people are obviously born to sing and dance or explain the stars in the sky or do magic tricks or be great leaders or athletes and so on. I think that could go back to the time when people had to live in small groups of relatives, maybe 50 or 100 people at the most, and evolution or God or whatever arranged things genetically to keep the little families going, to cheer them up so they could all have somebody to tell stories around the campfire at night, and somebody else to paint the pictures on the walls of the caves, and somebody else who wasn't afraid of anything, and so on. That's what I think. And of course, a scheme like that doesn't make sense anymore because simply moderate giftedness has been made worthless by the printing press and radio and television and satellites and all of that. A moderately gifted person who would have been a community treasure 1,000 years ago has to give up, has to go into some other line of work because modern communications put him or her daily into competition with nothing but world's champions. The entire planet can get along nicely now with maybe a dozen champion performers in each area of human giftedness. A moderately gifted person has to keep his or her gifts all bottled up until, in a manner of speaking, he or she gets drunk at a wedding and tap dances on the coffee table like Fred Astaire or Ginger Rogers. We have a name for him or her. We call him or her an exhibitionist. And how do we reward this exhibitionist? We say to him or her the next morning, "Wow, were you ever drunk last night?" And I guess that's my way of saying that maybe being somewhat of a generalist will allow for more flexibility within what Bloom calls the social body. And it's a change from being unwitting bodies to bodies of the sense of self within the greater whole. And it's not subjectivity or objectivity, because those are very hard things to pin down, but more of an inner subjectivity that I understand that I'm part of a greater process. But even within that field, I can have a little bit of individuality and a little bit of flexibility. And that both removes the pressure of having to perform in a certain way in every situation, and understand that in each situation, you might have to perform a little bit differently. Sometimes you're not going to be the leader. And thankfully, sometimes you won't be the outcast.
Right, sure.
But, someday it's your turn in the barrel, right? I mean, everybody has to do it at some point, has to take on a role they don't want. And I don't know if any of this makes any sense, but I find this ongoing look at the way we organize ourselves socially. And when we come to this discussion, and when what Vonnegut says about perhaps we're too large nowadays, perhaps we're too big, just look at what's going on in the United States. We talk about two tribes now, tribal thinking in the United States. And I keep coming back to, we're so big. I mean, my goodness, we are so big as a people. How can we not start dividing into subgroups and start fighting among ourselves? It just makes sense that would happen. And I don't know what to do about it, and to urge everybody, hey, be more of a generalist. I mean, that's going to get rotten fruit thrown at you, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there very clearly is this viewpoint. It seems like that engaging in moderation is recklessly engaging in, I don't know, weakness. I mean, being strident and adopting a completely rigid, extreme point of view or standpoint or skill or whatever it is viewed as being strength.
Yeah. And we live in such an age of specialization where, you talk to some people and it's like, well, I had to call a guy to fix this. And you're like, really? I mean, that's not that hard to fix.
Lefty loosey, righty tighty. Come on.
Right. Well, I don't want to be, I didn't know how to look, go online. I mean, there's tons of tutorials online where you can learn how to do stuff.
Right. YouTube.
And I don't always get it right. And when I get to a point where I'm messing up more than I get it right, that's when I call an expert in and say, yeah, I've totally, and the guy will come in and look at it and say, yeah, here's what you did wrong. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense now that an expert is pointing it out to me, that, we don't all have to be ubermensch and be able to do everything perfectly, but to know a little bit about everything is pretty cool. I mean, it's not a bad way to live. And, I look at my late father, who was, yes, he was a surgeon and he was very good at it, but he could also fix a car, and he knew how to farm land, and he knew how to ride a horse, and he was a pretty fair golfer, and just, he had all these different things that he could do fairly well.
Right.
And as a result, when he got sick and couldn't operate, he could go out and work on his cars for a while. He wasn't rambling around like, must apply surgical techniques to everything I do. He understood that he couldn't do that in every situation. Anyway.
Well, that in and of itself, in my view, is a bit of a skill. I mean, there are people that if they work on something incredibly hard and they don't excel at it, they can't enjoy it because it's not perfect or really close to perfect. I mean, golf. I mean, you can pick it. People have hobbies or professional endeavors that they engage in that they strive at, and they think they should be, quote, whatever it is, quote unquote, experts at. I mean, talk about golf is a perfect example. What a fickle thing, which you could play nonstop and never really get better at. And you could still choose to just recognize the fact that you're not very good and still enjoy it, or your failure to improve could drive you completely fucking nuts. And there are folks that are like that as well, that just can't possibly accept anything close to failure. Right. So
I just reached a point with golf where I was halfway through a round when I was living in Utah, and I was like, it's a beautiful day. There's mountains in the distance. I think I'd rather be up in those mountains than down here doing this. Yeah, I'm done. If I want to go on a walk, I'll go on a walk. I don't need a bunch of sticks and a ball.
Yeah, I mean, golf is something I admire in others. I mean, I'll happily go caddy,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
watch and drink a beer and enjoy a nice walk. Absolutely, and you can have all the frustration and break your clubs over your knee.
Well,
that's way funnier.
I've got a cousin who's a hell of a golfer,
mm-hmm.
and you know him. My cousin Robert, he's a hell of a golfer, and it's like he loved it so much he wanted to make a profession out of it. I'm like, hey man, go for it. Right. I'll drive your golf cart for you. I mean, that's about as good as I am on a golf course, but I'm okay with that. I'm all right with that. Or when I go bowling and someone says, you're not a very good bowler. It's like, never set out to be. Just
right. was not a life goal.
Didn't start this evening out thinking I'm bowling 300, baby.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm going to keep it out of those gutter thingies on the side. That's what I'm doing tonight. Anyway.
And as far as Boys Alone is concerned, I mean, I have not watched Girls Alone, but watching Boys Alone just validated for me the perspective that men can basically, I mean, destroy anything. I mean, women should just really be allowed to have control of everything for, I don't know, a couple of 100 years, because boys just fuck everything up. My God.
What was it? Who was it that said men are basically bears with furniture? I mean,
yeah, it's like, I mean, my set point may be different, but when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, even if I was told I could paint on the wall, I wouldn't have done it. Like, this belongs to somebody. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to just, like, no, that's completely irresponsible. I'd be aware of that. And my parents would have been absolutely fucking livid. They would have blown their stack. You did what? Like, and no. So that's part of the reason why that was so stressful. I watched that, like, gee, when I was that age, if I had done that, what would my, what would their reaction have been? Brings new meaning to the word recalcitrant or something. Oh my God, little turds.
Well, why is your mom in the ER? Because she blew a gasket. She was
she freaked out. You spread chocolate sauce on the walls? Why?
That is good for no one.
I don't know. It seemed like the thing to do. Dumbasses.
Well, when you're the father of boys, and when you're a boy, one of the things that you realize you're going to get it for an answer a lot of the times is, why'd you do this? I don't know.
Yeah, just learn to stop asking those questions. Like, no. He doesn't know.
All right, there you have it. Let's get organized. Part 2, the pecking order and other things. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't watched that documentary, please go do so. Sources for this were Lucifer Principle by Howard Bloom, and Boys Alone, a documentary directed by Kim Flitcroft, available on YouTube. Check them out. It's good stuff.
Yes, and don't kill hedgehogs. Just saying.
Yes, leave hedgehogs alone.
If given the chance, don't do it. All right, moving over to me.
Sure.
So we're doing sort of an extended curse word of the week.
Uh-oh.
It is time for the Dream Idiots curse word of the week.
So this week, so we're going to talk about something called a jizz score, which I